insists because of alleged fraud in Minnesota, they're feeling the backlash on social media, seeing less business in their stores.
At 9:12 a.m. in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, the day looked painfully normal. Morning traffic crawled through a quiet suburban strip. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. On the corner sat a one-story brick building that blended right in, the kind of place you'd pass without a second glance, looking exactly like an everyday childcare center. Bright alphabet cutouts clung to the windows like any kid-friendly spot. Out back, a small playground sat frozen in time, empty and waiting for the usual rush of children. Above the entrance, a red sign read Creative Minds Daycare, calm and welcoming. Then, without warning, that calm snapped. Unmarked federal SUVs poured into the lot, fast and coordinated, as agents from the FBI, ICE, and the Department of Health and Human Services jumped out and took position. HHS teams moved tight and focused, no hesitation, no small talk. This wasn't a routine visit or a paperwork check. They were serving a federal search warrant tied to what investigators had flagged as a hidden operations hub. And this wasn't just one location either. At the same exact moment, tactical teams rolled out across the Twin Cities metro, hitting 23 different sites in a synchronized sweep. Authorities were zeroed in on a large network of daycare centers tied to the same ownership structure, accused of pulling off massive taxpayer fraud. When agents pushed through the doors of Creative Minds, they weren't bracing for a quiet room. They expected the usual daycare chaos, busy staff, and rooms filled with toddlers.
Dozens of toddlers.
The escalation follows a now viral video that shows what appear to be empty daycare centers, mostly run by the Somali community.
Instead of teachers and the non-stop noise you'd expect from a center licensed for 99 kids, agents walked into pure silence. The main room was completely empty, no movement, no activity. Toys sat untouched on the shelves, coated in a thin layer of dust that made it clear nobody had played there in a long time. In the nursery, the cribs were spotless, lined up perfectly, like they hadn't been used for months. There were no children at all, no parents checking in, no drop-offs, no morning rush, just a small skeleton crew standing there, frozen, clearly shocked to be facing federal badges instead of another quiet, hollow day. Investigators later confirmed that this single location had pulled in $2.45 million in government subsidies over just the past year alone. But it didn't stop with empty rooms. Agents uncovered that Creative Minds had technically been shut down by the state months earlier over serious irregularities. The operation didn't slow down, though. Billing kept rolling in anyway. Instead of fixing the problems, the people running it allegedly covered their tracks by slapping a fresh vinyl banner over the old sign and kept the money flowing like nothing happened.
They have gotten repeated violation, 10 in June, that included the staff, that they had not completed training requirements, that children weren't put in there.
The center was already operating under a fresh name, Super Kids. With that new label slapped on, the money kept rolling in, the state kept paying, and on paper, so-called ghost children were marked present every single day. Names allegedly pulled from stolen data lists to keep the system churning. As agents locked down the building, the manager tried to explain why there were no records. What he said caught investigators completely off guard. He claimed that just one day earlier, right after the HHS secretary formally requested attendance logs, the place had been hit by burglars. But this story went way off the rails. According to him, these weren't regular thieves looking for cash or electronics. He insisted they skipped the computers, ignored money, and left everything valuable behind. Instead, he pointed to a jagged hole smashed straight through the sheetrock wall, connecting the daycare to the Family Dollar next door. The claim was wild. He said the intruders came in through the store's back kitchen, busted through the wall, and stole exactly one thing. Not the safe, not the merchandise, just the enrollment forms and employee documents, the very paperwork that investigators said would have exposed everything.
Who's now got over 80 million views on this thing, found more in a matter of hours than Tim Walz and Keith Ellison, our Attorney General, have found in 7 years.
The cover story was so thin it was almost offensive. It flat out insulted the intelligence of the agents standing there, but it also exposed the mindset behind the whole operation. These people truly believed they were untouchable. They believed no matter how sloppy the lie, no matter how obvious the red flags, the checks would still clear and the money would keep coming. If you think taking millions from programs meant to help hungry children is a serious crime that deserves real consequences, hit the like button and comment justice below. But those daycare raids were only the first layer of the onion. As federal data analysts dug deeper, they started cross-checking seized documents with state property records. That's when a second, even bigger scheme started to take shape. This wasn't limited to storefronts and commercial buildings anymore. The operation had quietly spread straight into residential neighborhoods. Analysts flagged a disturbing trend hiding in plain sight. In Brooklyn Park, a city with just 84,000 residents, there were 181 registered assisted living facilities. Now compare that to St. Paul, a much larger city with nearly 310,000 people, which had only 83. The numbers didn't add up at all. This wasn't caused by some sudden wave of illness or need. It pointed to something else entirely. A massive surplus of scammers exploiting the system wherever they could find an opening.
Of scammers.
It is the tip of an iceberg, essentially, something that they are looking into there, as well as the Small Business Association, Kelly Loeffler, the head of the business association there.
Federal teams then shifted their focus straight into residential neighborhoods. What they found looked ordinary from the outside. Standard single-family homes, quiet streets, trimmed lawns. But on paper, these houses were billing the state millions of dollars every year for round-the-clock specialized care. At one of these homes, agents identified the owner as a man named Gandhi Mohammed, also known as Gandhi Abdi Kadi. That name wasn't new to federal investigators at all. He had already been indicted in connection with laundering $1 million in the notorious Feeding Our Future case, widely described as the largest pandemic-related fraud scheme in U.S. history. Even with a federal indictment hanging over him, even while awaiting trial for allegedly stealing taxpayer funds, the payments didn't stop. The state of Minnesota was still sending money. His wife was listed as the administrator of the assisted living facility, and month after month, state checks continued to land in accounts tied to a family already charged in a massive fraud case. Investigators later found that this residential network alone had collected $2.3 million in state funds in just the past year. Since 2016, the same group had allegedly pulled in an eye-popping $49 million. When journalists and independent investigators knocked on doors, they didn't find medical centers. They found confused residents, often elderly immigrants with limited English, who had no idea their home was registered as a medical facility billing the government for intensive care. They weren't patients in a real system. They were being used as background props in a scheme built to drain public funds.
To a fraud scheme that totaled $250 million for funding that was for a nonprofit that was supposed to help hungry children.
The investigation made one thing painfully clear. This wasn't just a few bad actors slipping through the cracks. It was a system practically built to be taken advantage of. The barriers to entry were almost non-existent, and oversight was shockingly weak. Auditing, it barely existed. Federal auditors ultimately flagged 7,900 fraudulent loans tied to these networks, totaling roughly $400 million. These were Paycheck Protection Program loans and economic injury disaster loans, meant to keep American workers employed during the pandemic. On paper, the businesses looked legit. In reality, many of them existed only as names and filings. Instead of saving jobs, the money went elsewhere. Luxury cars, overseas real estate, including properties in Kenya, and a fast-growing criminal operation that expanded at an alarming pace. Investigators noticed extreme concentrations of fraud in certain zip codes, pointing to organized application mills. Shadow consultants were allegedly pumping out thousands of loan applications, charging kickbacks to anyone willing to play along. This wasn't simple theft, it was mass-produced fraud, a fully industrialized operation designed to drain relief programs at scale. Federal indictments are now stacking up for business owners linked to this ring. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss when the full list of names drops. As the true size of the operation came into focus, the probe spread far beyond Minnesota. This wasn't a local scandal anymore. It was a national emergency. The White House was briefed on the raids and released a jaw-dropping estimate. The total fraud across these connected networks, spanning daycares, food programs, and assisted living facilities, was pegged at $18 billion. To put that into perspective, $18 billion could fund 5 aircraft carriers or eliminate veteran homelessness in every major U.S. city.
The latest allegations add to a growing list of fraud investigations in Minnesota. So far, 92 people have been charged, including 82 Somali Americans.
Instead of really helping real families, the money vanished into a maze of shell companies and overseas transfers. And this wasn't staying local anymore. The spread had reached the West Coast. In Kent, Washington, federal investigators zeroed in on a place called Aisha Home. State childcare records showed this single home had pulled in $753,000 since 2022. Officially, it was licensed for just 12 children. But when an undercover investigator stepped inside, the scene felt off immediately. What they saw looked more like a staged setup than a real daycare. A small group of children stood quietly in one room. No toys scattered, no noise, no energy, no mess at all. It didn't feel natural. It felt rehearsed. Investigators later compared it to a Potemkin-style setup, a fake front built only to survive a scheduled inspection. The owner, Sarah Mullen, had received nearly $113,000 in direct childcare subsidies in just 2 years. On top of that, public records showed tens of thousands more in social and health-related benefits. The system was covering a salary, healthcare, and even housing, all tied to a business that appeared to serve almost no one. But the most damaging evidence wasn't what agents found inside that house, it was what wasn't there at all. In a real crisis where thousands of legitimate daycares suddenly shut down, you'd expect chaos. Phones ringing off the hook, parents flooding government offices, moms and dads panicking because they had nowhere to leave their kids so they could get to work, but none of that happened. There were no angry parents, no packed phone lines, no viral outrage online, just silence, wall-to-wall silence. And that silence told investigators everything. The explanation was cold and simple. The parents didn't exist. The children listed on the rolls were ghosts. Many of the so-called families tied to these payments were synthetic identities or people allegedly paid kickbacks just to lend their names to the roster. That quiet wasn't normal. It was proof, stronger proof than spreadsheets or audits. The entire setup was fake from top to bottom. The kids, the parents, the staffing numbers, all of it looked manufactured to keep money flowing without anyone asking questions. Once that reality sank in, the political fallout hit fast and hard. Critics blasted the situation as state-enabled theft. They argued that in the rush to push out public assistance without real safeguards, state systems had effectively opened the door to organized abuse. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz had previously praised the state's generosity. Now that same generosity was being questioned under a much harsher spotlight.
State and federal agents had already raided Ollie's Daycare Center in South Minneapolis. The business was suspected of billing the government.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has since come under intense scrutiny over the alleged fraud. His push for universal pre-K and expanded care was meant to help families, but investigators argued that this same generosity is exactly what the fraudsters took advantage of. By stripping away verification steps in the name of access and equity, critics say the state basically unlocked the vault and walked away. The Creative Minds raid, the sudden switch to the Super Kids name, the so-called burglary story. None of this was complex or clever. It was clumsy, bold theft carried out by people who believed no one was paying attention. They acted comfortable, almost reckless, because for a long time, nobody was watching. That has changed fast. Federal eyes are now wide open. The $18 billion free-for-all is done. The ghost hubs are sitting empty, and the only real lines forming in Minnesota today are at the federal courthouses, waiting for booking photos. Now the question isn't just who took the money, it's who let them keep access to the vault for so long. Who ignored the warning signs and waved it through? Do you believe state officials who allowed this level of fraud through negligence should be removed from office? Yes or no? Drop your answer below and stay alert.